There is a house I can only see from one window of my apartment. Written by BearInTuxedo. I am going to start with a bit of context. I live in an apartment building in a neighborhood with mostly single-family houses. This has the advantage of giving me a great view as opposed to the crowded cityscape that I was used to. The building is pretty modern, less than 5 years, and luckily with the modern design came floor-to-ceiling windows that I really enjoy. It's one of the bigger buildings with around 15 floors, and my place is on the 10th floor. The window in my living room has 4 equally sized sections, with one being a door to go to a balcony. I have the habit of checking the view every morning while I eat breakfast, which is how I noticed the change. I don't want anyone to know where I live or who I am, so I am not going to share any pictures, but you should have all the relevant information. I first noticed it on the 1st of January of last year. It might have started a few days before, but I doubt it. I have been kind of stressed in my life lately, and checking the view helps get me started in the morning. I think I noticed when I was walking between the 2 leftmost sections of my windows. One of the rooftops had a different color. On the leftmost window, the original house was kind of brick red, and the other house was dark gray. Those are the colors of most rooftops around here, so none of the houses looked weird by themselves. It wasn't obvious, and pretty far, but I know the view well enough that I noticed right away. I was hungover on that day, so even though it was weird, I felt that being alive after the night I had was weirder. I spent the day mostly doing my best to be alive. I didn't pay attention to it much. I assumed that my brain and eyes were just dying as much as I was. The next day, I looked again, and it was still the same. I checked every single window in my apartment, and I could only see the gray roof in one of them. I checked from the balcony. Nothing was out of the ordinary. The other house wasn't anything noticeable at first. It was the same style as most houses around it. A 2-story house with a front yard and a backyard. The kind of house I wish I could afford. Everything around it was the same. The gardens were in the same state, with the same trees and plants. I ordered some binoculars online, and the next day, yay for fast delivery, I checked the other house in detail. Apart from the roof, there were a lot of differences that I could now see. Nothing was out of the ordinary for the city where I live. They had similar style of architecture, but they were obviously different houses. The number and shape of the windows was different. The front porch had a different design, etc. If they had been next to each other, there wouldn't be any problem, but they were in the same place. I had no explanation for what was happening. I searched online and nothing helpful. I had a moment of hope when I read that a defect in the glass of the window might distort the light. I tested to see if there was anything abnormal by putting random objects on the other side, but everything appeared as expected. An insight that was a long shot, but I was getting desperate. One day, I felt particularly brave and went out directly to check the house. I walked there. Took me around 15 minutes, and unsurprisingly, I saw the original house. I tried to knock, but no answer. I checked from the windows as much as I could without risking getting noticed, and from what I could see, the house looked pretty much abandoned. From the viewpoints that I managed to get to, most of the furniture inside was covered with sheets, and nothing showed any sign of recent use. Before I left, I tried to open the door, but no luck. A few days later, I had another idea to try. I set up my phone on a makeshift tripod to film the other house from my window and went there again. When I got there, I kept my actions simple so I wouldn't forget what I did and would notice if my actions were different on the video. I went up the steps to the porch, knocked, waited a bit, no answer again, and walked the length of the porch before leaving. As soon as I came back, I watched the video. It showed me doing the exact same thing as I remember doing until I started walking the length of the porch. You see, the porches are not the same in each house. In the original house, after you get up the steps, you have some distance on each side. In the other house, the porch was smaller and only on the right after you got up the steps. In the video, I saw myself walk around on the right and then go back toward the left side. When I reached the left wall, I just stood there, looking at the wall. I didn't touch the wall, and if there is an acceptable distance to stand in front of a wall, that's how far I was. I wasn't sure what to expect. I might have been less freaked out if I saw myself go through the wall or walk into it like a Skyrim NPC. I started avoiding the window where I could see it. It made me uncomfortable, and as long as I didn't look at it, I could pretend that everything was normal. But it was always in the back of my mind, no matter how much I tried to distract myself. I still couldn't resist checking every morning with the small hope that everything would be back to normal. In February, I left for around a week to go visit family. I checked when I came back, and it was still the same. At that point, I started getting more annoyed by it than unsettled. It became part of my routine, a quirk of an apartment that you have to get used to. Annoying, but insignificant if you adapt. Like a stovetop with a single broken burner. Then April arrived, and with it, the brand new third floor of that damned house. It didn't appear new. It was still nothing out of the ordinary, except from the fact that it appeared overnight, in a house I could only see from one window. At that point, my first reaction was as expected. I panicked. As weird as the situation was before, at least it was stable. The change hit me way harder than when I saw the house for the first time. I used every piece of paper and cardboard to cover each inch of the window. Only then I managed to calm down. I thought, out of sight, out of mind. It worked for a few days until I noticed that the view that I enjoyed so much was not so calming anymore. Even if I couldn't see it, I knew the other house was still there. There was dread in the back of my head every time I looked outside. Somehow, knowing it was there without seeing it was making me feel even worse. So, I removed the coverings and looked at the house for the first time in a few days. The now 4 stories high house was now towering above the houses around it. The new floor didn't seem to have been added to the top like the last one, but instead between the first and second one. It was made of different material than the rest of the house. Instead of painted bricks like the other floors, it was smooth. The material in itself didn't look anything out of the ordinary, but the use of 2 different materials on the same house was unusual. That and the fact that it was around 2 times taller than the average house. Somehow, because something was now clearly wrong, it made me feel better. I think it's because so far I thought that something was wrong with me, and it was now clear to me that the house was what was wrong. I did 2 things after that. First, I went out and bought a camera. I bought the best one I could afford and made sure it could also film in low light. My idea was to record the next time a floor would be added to see how it happened. I followed a guide to set up automatic backups to make sure I wouldn't lose anything before I could watch it. Second, I finally decided to call for help. I had been avoiding inviting anyone because I didn't want my friends to think I was crazy. But now being crazy seemed like it might be a better option. I showed one of my friends for the first time, and they noticed right away. And then they showed a complete lack of interest in it. Sort of like the, "oh no, anyway" meme. They didn't seem to want to talk about it at all. I tried to show them again, but they answered as if it was the most boring thing imaginable. I asked a second friend a few days later, and they had the same reaction. I asked them to describe it to me, just in case they were seeing something else. It took a bit of convincing, but they did so, and described the exact same thing I was seeing. They just didn't care about it at all. I called back my first friend to check what they had seen, but they didn't remember seeing it at all. They remembered everything else we did on that day, but not me showing them the other house. Since asking for help didn't seem to do anything, I fell back to my first plan. I kept an eye on the camera. I fast-forwarded through the recording every day, checking for anything unusual. This was my routine for the rest of the year. On the first day of this year, I woke up to a room that was strangely a bit darker than usual. I went, half asleep, to check on the camera, as I usually do. It had fallen down during the night and was filming the ceiling. I checked later, and of course nothing useful was on the recordings. I looked outside to see if anything had changed, which made clearer why my apartment felt darker. The house was now at monstrous height, far taller than my floor. It had a tree-looking shape, a tree made from an unholy collection of floors with different styles, materials, and colors. The first floors were still as thin as the original house, but they grew thicker, almost distorted, on the higher floors. It also had floors branching out, each branch having apparently grown at its own speed like a regular tree. The impossible architecture cast its shadow, blocking the morning sun from reaching that single window of my apartment. It was so absurd to see that I could do nothing else but just accept it. I gave up things, going back to normal. This was my life now. I had tried everything I could think of, and now I had to just live with it, no matter how wrong it felt. For those wondering, I have been considering moving since the start. I even found a few places in my price range, but I decided against it each time. My life isn't the most exciting. Nothing really interesting ever happened to me. No matter how scared I am, and I am, when I have some quiet time to think about it, I can't bring myself to just leave it behind me. I don't know what I'm going to do from now on, but I need to see this thing to the end. I wasn't planning to share this with anyone. I have no advice for people in the same situation, and I don't have a lot of hope that people can help me. The latest developments made me realize that I may not be able to share my story once it's over, so I decided to share what I could before something happens. For the last week or so, I noticed a branch that is growing differently from the others. Usually they branch out for a bit and then grow up. I kept an eye on the new one for a few days to make sure, and now I don't have a doubt about it anymore. It's growing straight toward me.